Steak is great. It's an important part of your diet as it being protein, and it's downright delicious. But has this ever happened to you? You go to your favorite restaurant, and when you sit down, you order your go-to, a sirloin steak. You get it cooked how you normally get it cooked, and after a good 20 to 25 minute wait, it arrives. It looks great, it smells great, but when you pick up your fork and your knife and you begin to cut into it, and you cut and cut and cut into it, you realize it's more like you're sawing into the steak. And when you finally get to saw off a piece that you can put in your mouth, and you begin to chew and chew and chew, you realize something. Not only is it lacking flavor, but it's tough. It's a tough piece of meat. So why settle for less? Why settle for a bad steak when protein is such an essential part of your diet? Lizzie Straight on Does Red Meat Have Health Benefits says, the protein in beef is complete, meaning it contains all the essential amino acids that humans must get from food. Your body needs protein for muscle and tissue growth and maintenance. Are you tired of eating unsatisfactory steaks? Ones that make you feel less than human? Well, what makes a sirloin such a bad cut of meat? It really goes down to the marbling as well as the tenderness of the steak. Marbling specifically is the layers of fat in your steak whenever you cut it off the bone. It depends on the cow, especially where you get it from the cow, as well as how hard you cook it. Chrissy Downey on What is the Best Cut of Steak says, sirloin is much leaner, with less marbling and therefore less flavor, which causes it to not have as much of a taste to it. On the other hand, tenderness is a big thing when it comes to steaks, and sirloin is lacking tenderness due to the lack of marbling as well as where it is on the cow. Due to the muscle that it comes from being exercised quite a lot, there's not a lot of fat stored up, which makes it less tender and more tough. Ryan Nielsen on Top Sirloin versus Filet Mignon says, the sirloin is taken from the sirloin part of the cow, hence the name, which is near the round section. For those unfamiliar with the butcher's terms, the sirloin is in the front of, but not on the hind leg. Because of this, top sirloin gets a fair amount of exercise and is one of the leaner cuts of meat. So why is this such an issue? Well, why would you settle for less when there's so much better options to have? And what can you do to have those better options? Well, why don't we consider them? There's a bunch of great options when it comes to cuts of steak, especially those that range from most flavorful to most tender. Many different options that are way better than the sirloin. If you're looking for something with a lot more flavor, a lot of people go for the ribeye. Darius on Why Ribeye Steak Instead of Other Cuts says, the ribeye steak comes from the rib, which means that there will be more marbling than other cuts like strip steak or flank steak. Marbling is where you see streaks of white fat running through the meat, which makes it moist and tender while cooking. This particular cut of meat also has high levels of protein in comparison to other cuts like sirloin, which has less protein but more connective tissue. Hence, ribeyes are easier to chew on than some others. Usually when you see a ribeye, they're a lot more flat and a lot more bigger than other cuts. As well as when you're looking for is the marbling on the steak. It should be throughout and evenly dispersed. If you're going for a more tender steak, a lot of people like the fillet. The fillet is a great option as it is one of the most tender cuts that you can get. It comes from the same part of the sirloin, but because it's not worked as much as the sirloin muscle, it's a lot more tender, while also staying a lot less fatty. Ryan Nielsen on Top Sirloin versus Filet Mignon says, the filet is taken from the softer portion of the tenderloin, which is near to where you would find top sirloin. But filet mignon comes from a muscle grouping that gets a lot less exercise. Despite that, it is still a lean steak, which means filet mignon is super tender with little marbling. If you're going for a good mix of tenderness and flavor, a lot of people like the New York strip, which would be a thicker cut of meat, which has little less marbling than a ribeye, but is well dispersed. Ohana Steaks from The Butcher's Guide, What is a New York Strip, says, the New York Strip has intense flavor with bold, beefy notes. It's not the most tender steak. One of the reasons people love it is for the great bite and solid chew. The rich marbling inherent in its steak creates a robust flavor and a delicious eating experience. So when we look at it, we like to look at it as a scale of sorts. A lot of people scale steaks from flavor-wise to tenderness. If you're looking for a steak with a lot more tenderness, a lot of people start off with the filet. Like I said, the filet is usually like a sirloin, but has a lot less fat in it, as well as it being a better cut, so it's a lot more tender. If you're going for the next most tender steak, a lot of people like the ribeye. Because of the amount of marbling that it has, it's a lot easier to cook and a lot easier to chew. If you're going for the next, would be the New York Strip. The strip is a great option as it still has a lot of flavor and it's not the most tough steak, but isn't the most tender. If you're going for one that's just at the last tier, a lot of people choose the sirloin because of its less marbling and where it is due to the exercise from the cow, it isn't as tender. If you're looking at it from a flavor scale, a lot of people like to settle on the ribeye. The ribeye is a great choice due to the marbling. Since it is so integrated into the meat, it is really flavorful and packs a punch. If you're going for the next one, a lot of people go towards the New York Strip. Like the ribeye, it has a lot of marbling, but not as much, so it's more of a leaner cut. If you're going for the next drop-off, the sirloin steak does have a lot more flavor compared to the filet, but due to the lack of tenderness, a lot of people still rank it lower. And then at the end of that scale would be the filet, where a lot of people mostly choose it for its tenderness, but it's a great steak to pair with sauces and other things. So when you compare the two scales and you decide to choose on your steak, why would you settle for a sirloin when there's so many better options? Not only is a sirloin lacking in flavor, it is also lacking in tenderness. It's a tough steak that when you work for it and you continue to work for it via chewing, which hurts your jaw most of the time, it's not a great end product. It's not as beneficial or as rewarding as a better steak would be. So when you sit down at that restaurant and you decide to treat yourself with a steak, why settle for less? Treat yourself. Get a ribeye.